Hello students, in the previous class we learned the first 3 paragraphs of what is moral action by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Let's move on to part 2, that is paragraph 4 to 6. Before that, let's quickly recapitulate the previous session. In this lesson, Mahatma Gandhi speaks about moral action with many examples. He says a moral act must be a personal one, springing from our own determination. God within us, the God of all, is the ever-present witness to all our acts. A moral act is a good act done with a good and sincere intention. Now, in every paragraph, Gandhiji adds a criterion. Let's see what's that criterion he adds in the 4th paragraph. He says it's not enough for a moral act to have been done with a good intention, but it should be done without compulsion. Getting up early in the morning is good, is the best habit. You can see the image here, the joy in the face of these youngsters. They wake up early every day, begin the day with the prayer and plan their activities. It's best for health, isn't it? But here is the example in which Gandhiji says that you wake up early with the fear that if you are late for office, you might lose your job. There is a fear in your mind. There is no love for your job. Go to office early, do your work sincerely. That is the best spirit. It is moral act. But waking up early in the morning with the fear of reaching office, another fear is that you might lose your job. Can I call this action as a moral act? You are telling no, because it is not done with the good intention. In the same paragraph, Gandhiji says, a plain and unpretentious life would be moral if, though wealthy, I think of all the want and misery in the world about me and feel that I ought to live a plain and simple life, not one of ease and luxury. Now, why he says this? Gandhiji, while stating that a moral act should not have been done with compulsion, gives an example here of people who try to make a simple living. If a person lives a simple and plain life only because he does not have the means to live a life of luxury, it does not become a moral act. On the contrary, if a wealthy man, on seeing the wants and misery of the people around him, feels that he ought to live a plain and simple life, not one of ease and luxury, such simple living becomes a moral action. Look at this slide. An act to be moral, it has to be free from fear and compulsion. It is only selfish and not moral of an employer to sympathize with his employees or to pay them higher wages, lest they would leave him. It would be moral if the employer wished well of them, kindly realizing how he owed his prosperity to them. Now here you have the picture of the workers, employees working together. There is peace of mind. Here in the another image also, you have the employer considering everybody's ideas, wishes, and taking a decision. In this, what you come to know is, it is not out of fear, but with the love for his employees. If an employer works, then it is a moral action. Imagine if he pays higher wages to the employees only to retain them in his company. This act is done with the selfish aim in mind, isn't it? Giving them higher salaries to his employees so that they don't leave the job, not with the feeling that he owed his prosperity to them, but with the fear that they would leave the job and join some other company. If that fear is there, with that fear, if he raises the salary, then that act won't be moral act. It is done with what, children? It is done with fear and compulsion. Got it? Next, another example Gandhiji gives is of King Richard II of England. Richard II of England, during his time, there was a revolt. It was a major uprising in England. There were a lot of attacks, killing, bloodshed in England, and it was actually the result of that time there was a pandemic, it seems, in 1340. There was a pandemic called Black Death, and due to that there was political tension, socio-economic tension in the year 1381. Got it? So during that year 1381, there was a major uprising during the time of King Richard II in England. What he did was, in order to stop the bloodshed or revolt, when the peasants came to him demanding their rights, he granted them their rights. King Richard granted the peasants their rights. Is it a good act? Yes, you will agree, saying that listening to the people's grievances is a good act. But what happened was, later, when the danger was over, when he realized that the danger was over, what he did was, he forced them to surrender the letter of his seal and signature, or the rights which he had given them earlier. He asked them to surrender all the letters with rights and privileges which he had given earlier to them. Now, which act do you call this act as a moral act? First act would be moral, but the second immoral. But his act is done with fear and not an iota of morality in it. Iota is smallest amount. So there is no morality in the act of King Richard II. That's what Gandhiji says, because he did good act with fear and compulsion. Another example from the world-renowned poet Shakespeare. Just as a moral act should be free from fear and compulsion, so should there be no selfish interest behind him. It is not to say that actions prompted by self-interest are all worthless, but only that to call them moral would detract from the moral idea. That honesty cannot long endure, which is practiced in the belief that it is the best policy. As Shakespeare says, love born out of the profit motive is no love. Now in this paragraph number 5, Gandhiji says that moral action should be free from fear and compulsion. It should also be free from self-interest. It should not be an action prompted by self-interest. Now, if there is self-interest, then it is worthless. If you love a person with a selfish motive, then it is no love. So, Love your parents unconditionally. Study without any selfish end in your mind, but with the desire to learn. Now, this one, call them, he says, moral act would detract from the moral idea. He says, honesty cannot long endure, which is practiced in the belief that it is the best policy. Honesty is the best policy. Have you heard this sentence? Have you heard this saying? All have heard this, isn't it? Gandhiji comments that if someone tries to be honest in his actions and does not have any self-interest behind it, only then an honest act becomes a moral act. There should be no self-interest. Go to help someone with the self-interest that you will get in return. Your name will be published in the newspaper. You will be highlighted in the banners while giving alms to the people. This is doing the good act with self-interest. This is not called an honest act. Now, honest act is an act which is done without self-interest. Only then it becomes a moral act. In the next paragraph, sixth paragraph, Gandhiji gives the example of Saint Francis Xavier. He is a Jesuit priest. Now, Saint Francis Xavier passionately prayed that his mind might always remain pure. Such a good act, idea. He prayed for his mind to be pure. For him, devotion to God was not for enjoying higher seat after death in heaven, not to gain a seat in heaven. He prayed because it was man's duty to pray. Isn't it a good life? Isn't it a holy life? Next example is of Saint Teresa. Saint Teresa wished to have a torch in her right hand and a vessel in her left hand. Now, why did she wish to have a torch in her right hand? Was to burn the glories of heaven, it seems. She wanted to burn the glories of heaven, and with her water in the vessel in the water, she wanted to extinguish the fires of hell so that men serve God from love alone, without fear of hell, without fear of temptation of heavenly bliss. So there should not be fear. I pray, I love one another, I do good deed so that I go to heaven. This is a selfish act. Saint Teresa says she wants to burn the fire of hell and wash the fear of temptation so that without any selfishness I go to heaven. So that is Saint Teresa's idea. Here you have the picture of Henry Clay. Henry Clay was an American senator. He was a statesman and attorney, and he was known for his kindliness. He sacrificed his convictions to his ambition. Whereas another example of Daniel Webster tells that he had great intellect, he had great sense of heroism, and he had intellectual integrity, but he sold it. He sold his intellectual integrity for a prize. There is a story of Devil and Daniel Webster. There he had made series of compromises, though, to keep America in peace. Both Henry Clay and Daniel Webster loved and served their country greatly and united the country without the force of arm. But Daniel Webster compromised his intellectual integrity for a prize. So his act of being a leader of America is not a moral act because he had one selfish end. Gandhiji tells us that just as an action prompted by the motive of material gain here on earth is non-moral, so also another done for considerations of comfort and personal happiness in another world is non-moral. We must think that our activities in this earth must endure happiness. But if you do it with the intention of gaining happiness in another world, then it becomes a non-moral action. That action is moral, which is done only for the sake of doing good. Now, this is the next criterion. That is, action should be done only with the sake of doing good. In the fourth paragraph, he says it should be done without fear and compulsion. Next paragraph, he says there should be no self-interest in our act. And here he says it should be done for the sake of doing good. Only then it is called a moral act. In conclusion, Gandhiji says that a moral act is selfless, free from fear and compulsion, having no material gains. He says that it should be done with good intention, only for the sake of doing good. Moral act becomes a good act when we do it with a good intention, without any selfish motive, without any desire of profit, without any desire of reaching heaven. It should be done with pure mind. Let's go through the glossary. Unpretentious. Unpretentious is modest, not showy. Iota, underline these words in your textbook, students. Iota is the smallest amount. Search where is this word detract. Did you get it? Search in paragraph 5. Detract is to diminish the worth or value. Integrity is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. Sublime, of very great excellence or beauty. So, be true to yourself and your beliefs. With this note, I end my class. Thank you and God